Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 43, where we talk all things fantasy baseball prospecting, but especially prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team Dynasty league with 20 minor league positions for each team for a glorious 600 prospects. I'm excited to be back a couple weeks after the last show to talk more about J15s, and this is actually part 2 of the J15 analysis. And I'm going to update today some of the commentary I had on the prospects I highlighted in last week's show, because since that show, Baseball America has re-released its top 30s to include some of these J15s, exactly as I said they would do very soon. They've done it, so I wanted to update my views on those players and add a couple additional players for your draft day consideration based on Baseball America's rankings. These players I'm going to highlight that I did not highlight on the last show are guys I always liked, but now I like them even more. Because of the way Baseball America graded them. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. And if you're watching the show live, please feel free to ask questions in the comments. This is, as I said, part 2 of my J15 analysis for this year. And the first guy we talked about last week was Wandy of the Mets. He actually did end up signing with the Mets for a whopping $3.9 million, surely a vote of confidence by the Mets. But in my discussion of him last week, I was highlighting the baseball MLB pipeline grades of him, which are reflected in the grade there on the left: 65 hit tool, 60 power, 60 speed, 65 overall. Well, Baseball America came out with its grading of Wandy, and it's a slight downgrade. They gave him a 45 hit tool. And one thing I use these comparisons for is to really look at wide gaps in evaluation, because it creates more uncertainty, which for J15 players is even more significant than you would see with a stateside player, because these guys are not scouted as heavily as the stateside players are. So these differentials between a hit tool, 20-point swing, could be a reflection of a lot of things. It could just be the time the scout saw the player live. So it could be an anomaly in the difference, or it could just reflect a really different view on the player based on a number of scouting sessions with the player. So that's an alarm bell when you see a 20-point swing in the hit tool grade. You can also see there's a slight downgrade in power from a 60 to a 55, which is within the margin of error, really. Same speed grade, the run grade is the same, so it's pretty much consensus this guy's going to be a good base runner and possibly a base stealer at the major league level. But a 10-point drop in overall quality of the player and ceiling potential of 65 to 55. So what does that mean? Last episode I was talking about Wandy being a first-round graded player. In a 30-team format, I've now bumped him down into the second round, principally driven by the 45 hit tool grade that Baseball America gave him. So pump the brakes a little bit on the excitement for Wandy. He's still just 16 years old. He's still going to be the youngest player in the DSL for this upcoming season. He'll be 16 for the entire season. And a lot of the positive attributes I highlighted on last week's show, which are still reflected on this slide, hold true. A lot of exit velocity, a lot to be excited about, but I would want to proceed with a little bit more caution in taking him. 55 grade overall is still an above average regular, according to Baseball America. And in a 30-team format, they're going to be harder pressed to get a guy in the second round with these kind of tool grades of power and speed combined. The kid can also play defense, which suggests he has a good likelihood of actually sticking on the dirt and getting regular playing time, assuming things go well. Of course, he's only 16 years old. He has a lot of years ahead of him to get up to the major leagues. A lot can happen, as I talked about in the last episode, as part of the volatility of selecting J15s. And you have to have that sort of stomach for the risk if you're going to do it. A lot of owners don't. Part of the purpose of these last 2 episodes has been to highlight some potential buying opportunities and some profit, particularly if you can get them a little bit later in the draft than otherwise you might be forced to. So here, second round grade, I would love to be able to get Wandy in the middle to the bottom of the second round. I suspect, because he's a Met and there's a lot of exuberance for Mets players by Mets fans, it's going to cost a little bit more than that and probably be an early second round pick. So that's Wandy. Again, still excited about him, just a little bit less excited than I was 2 weeks ago when I did the last podcast. So let's talk about the next player I discussed in last week's episode. It was Francisco Renteria, who was a player I was very high on, and I was really stunned by the Baseball America grade when it came out. And I actually wonder if it's a typo by Baseball America when they pushed this live. They gave him a 40 hit tool. And everything else basically is in line with the Major League MLB pipeline grade. 60 power, 65, again, it's a small difference. 60 speed holds true, and 55 versus 60 overall. Again, slight difference, probably within the margin of error there. Still an above average player. But when you see a 20-point swing here in the hit tool grade, that is alarming. And it does not jive with the write-ups of this player, Francisco Renteria. The MLB pipeline write-up, talks about him being a contact monster and goes through his plate discipline with some level of detail. And there's nothing in the Baseball America write-up of him that would suggest he has severe contact problems. That would be a 40 grade hit tool. So I'm wondering if there's just some disconnect between the scouting grades and the write-ups. But we'll see. But it's certainly an alarm bell when you see this. So I bumped him down into the third round from the second round grade that I had on him previously, which is very annoying because I just had my first-year player draft, and I chose Renteria for a pretty hefty price over another player I'm going to talk about a little bit later, who I also like very much. But I was counting on a better grade from Baseball America, and so I'm alarmed by this 40 grade. So we'll see how things play out. I'll note that the Baseball America write-up just said he was probably a power over hit guy for right now, but that doesn't suggest a 40 grade hit tool. I'll reiterate once again that he is getting Connor Griffin comps, which is a player who was also criticized going into last year's first-year player draft for hit tool concerns. So we'll see if there's any kind of correlation between the upward trajectory of those two players, but that'll be hard to match what Connor Griffin has done. And anyway, that's Francisco Renteria. Interesting kind of preview of Baseball America's thinking on him, which I was disappointed to see, and I'm sure the Phillies fans would be disappointed by it as well. They did pay him $4 million, which is slightly more than the Seaton got, and it's one of the higher bonuses that any player got. So certainly a vote of confidence by the Phillies, suggesting that they don't have as much concern about the hit tool as Baseball America does, but we'll see. Time will tell with all these kids. So who was the next guy I talked about? Emanuel Luna of the Cardinals. He did, in fact, sign with my beloved Cardinals, which I was very excited to see. I'm very high on Luna. They got him for $2.3 million, which is right around what was kind of rumored he was going to sign for. And they graded him out pretty strongly. You'll see the hit tool grade is slightly lower, and this is a consistent theme with Baseball America. They usually grade the hit tools a little bit lower on DSL players, which is perfectly understandable given the age these kids are at. And they have a slightly different scouting approach than Pipeline has. But here, what really caught my attention with the grades for Baseball America was the upticks in power, speed, and overall grade. Baseball America tends to be more conservative than MLB Pipeline in grading DSL players, which is why I put more stock into the Baseball America grades generally. And here, you see almost across the board, it's higher. And 60 is, again, above average player projection, an occasional all-star type of level player. And it's hard to get that kind of power and speed combination, in a player at any level. But this is certainly a very exciting ball player because he's 16. He's still got projection left, 6'2", 195. That power grade could grow even further. And if the Cardinals can make sure that his hit tool develops along properly, even if he gets up to a 50 or 55 hit tool, that would be amazing. But even if he gets to a 50, this is a potential superstar that the Cardinals drafted. Very exciting. So I moved him up on my draft board into the late first, second round in that area. Again, in a 30-team format, you're going to be hard-pressed to get a 60-grade player of this value, deeper into the draft. So that's the time to strike on a guy like this. He could go even higher. I was very thrilled in this first-year player draft that I just referenced to get him at a very cheap price. And in fact, he was on the board when Baseball America issued its grades. So I was very happy to snag him before that got, digested by the broader audience to the extent folks are reading this. So anyway, Emanuel, we're looking forward to seeing him play stateside after this year, and we'll be tracking him very, very closely. I wouldn't be surprised if I own many shares of him throughout the first-year player draft process this year. So who's next? Santiago Solarte is a guy I had highlighted for like third or fourth round consideration. Well, Baseball America came up and upgraded him. Very, very similar to Luna. You can see the 45 hit tool is the same as MLB Pipeline, but for 60 grade power, slight downtick from MLB Pipeline, 50 running, perfectly fine, 55 overall, so it upgraded him overall over MLB Pipeline. And again, this is kind of like 60 power grade for his frame, 6'5", 203. He's 17 years old. Already has this massive exit velocity. The Marlins signed him for $1 million. This is an organization that moves their DSL players along aggressively. Be very interesting to see how he progresses. If he grows a little bit more, he may have elongated swings and exaggerated hit tool issues. So we'll have to monitor that closely. But really like this kid. There's a rumor that he's going to skip the DSL entirely, which is, as I've said, always a good sign when a major league organization has got that much confidence in a player that they're going to aggressively advance him. So he'll be very young potentially for his level. He could be stateside already in 2026. That really caught my attention, and that alone, coupled with the 55 overall grade and 60 power, has moved him like into the second round for me. I still like Luna a little bit more than Solarte, but this is like a really exciting kid, massive power potential. You could see like real 65 grade power out of this kid, given his frame, assuming he comes along and develops, accordingly. Again, a lot, has to happen for him to all come together. He's a 17-year-old kid, but certainly like a really exciting guy. Will probably shift over to third base and be a power corner, which is perfectly fine. One end of it, the premium position of shortstop, but that's okay if you deliver real power from the corner. So again, upgrading him, I think he's a steal in the late second round. And a lot of owners will pass up on him and will instead be drafting 50 grade college players who they feel are safer. So again, it really depends on your risk tolerance for a player like Solarte. But really nice steal there, in my opinion, coming into the first-year player drafts. So now I want to talk about a couple guys I did not highlight on last episode, but I liked, and now I like a little bit more because of the way Baseball America graded them. And Juan Rio is one of them. This is a right fielder. He's listed as center field, but he projects as a corner outfielder. He signed with the Mariners for $2.2 million. And, pretty good frame, 6'1", 185, not as big and strong as some of these other players I've highlighted, but he's got a little bit of projection left. But what really stands out about him in the scouting reports is his approach at the plate. You see that both Baseball America and Pipeline gave him a 55 grade hit tool. And that is consistent with what you read about him in the write-ups. He has a consistent hit tool. In other words, it's not as if he is flashing a mature approach at the plate. He is consistently demonstrating that as a 17-year-old. He has also consistently reached his power, and you can see they both gave him a 60 grade power, which is nice to see. He also has a high on-base percentage and the potential for a high on-base percentage, which if you're playing in a points league, which ABL is, that can really matter because walks generate points, or if you're playing in an OBP league, this is a guy who might end up one day really having a nice value for you. Not a speedster, right? I was happy to see Baseball America gave him average speed as opposed to 45 Pipeline, but we're not going to expect a lot of steals out of Juan Rio, which is typical of a corner outfielder. But both of the organizations, scouting organizations, gave him a 55 overall. Again, above average regular. I've got this kid, in the second or third round, maybe early third round, really nice value. Comes out of the DR, signed for $2.2 million. Again, a nice vote of confidence from an MLB organization that does a lot of work in the Dominican Republic and in Latin America. They have a long line of DSL players they've had success with. So you always like to see that as well. In other words, you have a major league organization that kind of knows what it's doing when it comes to the DSL. So this is a big positive to me. I did note here on the slide, it's not clear to me how much projection he has left. At 17, 6'1", 185, he already had a growth spurt that added a lot of power to his profile, where he was previously getting like John Jay comps for his hit tool. He is now getting much more attractive comps when people compare him to major league players because he put on muscle. But sometimes that can be a warning sign that there's not a lot of projection left. So that's something to watch for as well. All these kids grow differently. But at 6'1", 185, he may be at peak. But even if he is, it's a pretty good ball player if you can nab him in the second or third round. So I really like him. Excited to see him, up there. He went for, a pretty solid price in my most recent draft, which was an auction and not a snake draft. But anyway, that's another good ball player to keep in mind on draft day. I'll be very interested to see how he progresses through the rankings that people have for major league prospects going to the first-year player drafts. But if there's a good buy low opportunity on him, or I should say a good value proposition on him, I'll be jumping all over him. And I've got a couple second-round picks in most of my leagues. Let's talk about the next player. This is Johnessy, who's a shortstop. He's 16 years old, signed with the Athletics. And this is the guy that I was comparing to Francisco Renteria. So Colomé was the other guy I really liked. And I had to pick between the two of them and where I was going to put my money. And Baseball America is telling me I bet wrong. So Baseball America came out and graded him a 55 hit tool, 60 power, 50 speed, 65 overall, which is incredible. You can see the pipeline scores above, which are also spectacular, slightly better power, slightly less overall. This is a 16-year-old kid who's already 6'2", 190. It's a big guy. And he comes out of the DR, got a $4 million signing bonus. So a little bit more than the Sejan. Huge upside. He's the son of a Major League Baseball player. He's getting like Vlad Guerrero, Manny Machado comps. He's got consistent power already being reached in games. So this is a guy that, frankly, is a top 10 pick to me. And that's where Renteria might have fallen if he had gotten a better grade from from Baseball America. So, if you have a late first round pick, this is a late top 10 pick in the first round. This is the guy you might want to take a strong look at. Very difficult to get this kind of combination of overall upside and power and hit tool combination. Does lack the speed. So if you're looking for like a multi-tool player, this is not the guy who's going to fill that need. And I'm going to talk about a player in just a moment who I view as also being a top 10 pick, who is going to have like a really nice upside for you as well. But again, Colomé is a guy who I think is flying under the radar for a lot of people. He's very exciting, and to my league mate who snagged him in my most recent draft, congratulations. Hopefully he works out. But a very exciting ball player, and somebody you should keep in mind on draft day. And lastly, I wanted to cover Luis Hernandez, who is the consensus overall number one choice of the J15s this year. He signed with the Giants. He's a shortstop. The Giants have done a very good job over the last few years of identifying DSL talent. They have numerous number one prospects from the DSL that are progressing along nicely throughout their system. So let's talk about Hernandez. There's a lot of hype with him. He's going to be very expensive on draft day. He's 17 years old, 5'10", 172. So I want to talk about his frame a little bit. He's a little smaller of a ball player than I would like to see. So for me, a lot of his value is going to be based on projection. Like how much is he going to grow and how much physical projection is left. That's key to me, as I note on the right-hand part of the slide. And I've read various things about it. There are some scouting reports that suggest there's a lot of physical projection left. This is a very difficult thing to scout. There's a lot of guesswork in it. So if you are going to expend a high pick on him, you just have to understand there's a lot of risk, because if he remains at 5'10", 172, he may never develop really difference-making power. He might be a really good hitter who can, give you great defense and play, but he's not going to give you speed. You can see he's not a fast runner. You can see the 45 grade with each scouting organization. That's below average, so he's not going to be a base stealer. He's not a guy who's going to likely score a lot of runs, because he's not going to be a great base runner extending bases. So it's really dependent to me, his value on his hit tool coming along, coupled with his power and how much power he can develop. I have less doubt about his hit tool because he just gets rave reviews for his approach. He has a very low K rate. He's got a very mature approach at the plate. He has played consistently against older players and has dominated in those tournaments. Signed for $5 million, which is by far the highest signing bonus. And he's praised for his work ethic and also his high baseball IQ. And take that for whatever you think it's worth. I suspect that he's going to end up being a top 5 pick in a lot of leagues, certainly a top 10 in most deep leagues. More shallow leagues, he could go a little bit lower because people are fearful of the J15s. But to me, the risk reward really hinges again on this power combination. Is it going to come together? Is his frame going to develop? Really hard to say. So high risk, high reward, particularly given the cost on draft day. This is a guy that my projection system will probably have in the top 5. And I have some picks in the top 5 in a couple of my leagues. And, it's going to be a very difficult decision, even though I project him in that range, whether I want to bite the bullet and expend that high of a draft pick on a guy who may never be a power hitter. It's perfectly fine to get a middle infielder who can hit for average and get on base. But when you can't produce runs, you can't produce steals, you're really limiting the value of a player you spent that much money on. So, to recap, would you rather have Luis Hernandez within the top 5, or would you rather have Colome in the top 10? This is a kid, Colome, that I would probably target in drafts and even consider trading back for in the first round, later in the top 10, if I had a pick that might net me Luis Hernandez. And you might end up having both slide to you and be able to pick up one of the two. If you're focused on these players, and there are a lot of good players in the top 10 this year, including some pitchers, a lot of pitchers, which actually creates another issue. I think for owners going into the first-year player draft this year, there's a lot of hesitance to draft pitchers, particularly high school pitchers, and a lot of the top ones are young this year with a couple of exceptions. So to me, the first-year player draft this year has a lot of risk in the top 10, which is why I think a lot of people are trading down or trading out of the early picks. I actually traded up in a couple leagues to get early picks because I do like some of the players there, but even the hitters in the top 10 are young. There are very few college hitters in the top 10 this year that people have a lot of conviction on. So I think to state it simply, there's a lot of volatility in the top 10 this year in the first-year player draft. And I think, these J15s have to be in that conversation because you already have a volatile crop. And you might as well consider these guys, Colome and Hernandez in particular, when you're sifting through whether you want to spend that early round draft pick on an 18-year-old pitcher and are concerned about him blowing out his arm with Tommy John or whatever else, a shoulder injury, and waiting all those years for an 18-year-old pitcher to reach the majors, where these hitters are likely to be advanced more quickly. Again, ton of volatility, but again, ton of volatility for the pitchers as well. And so I think it's an interesting choice as we go into the first-year player draft this year. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my early picks this year. I've got in ABL, I've got 1.2 and 1.9. I have a sense of who might be there for me and who I might take, but I'm not going to reveal it on the show. But I can certainly tell you that Colome and Hernandez are on my mind, as are a couple of the ball players that I really like early in the round. But anyway, that's the update on the J15s. Quick episode this week. I'll be returning soon to do more first-year player draft analysis a little bit later as we get closer to draft day, and have some other guests on, as I usually do, to talk about the draft. I'm also working on the prospect handbook for the ABL, which I'll circulate to my other leagues that I'm in as well. Again, for those of you that are uninitiated, it ranks 600 prospects that are rostered in the ABL and are eligible to be prospects still. In other words, they have not appeared yet in the majors. I have my own top 100 list, but there's a whole methodology that I use. It will be updated this year, which I'll have a show dedicated to. We're integrating statistics into this year's handbook and moving some things around in terms of how players are graded. There'll be some differences from past years, but really looking forward to completing that. I've already input all the data, and now I'm just working with my good friend Tom to kind of do some of the knob turning that needs to be done to make the handbook work and come together. And of course, we have to have the draft in the ABL so that I can finish out the rosters and then finally publish it. So looking forward to that. That'll probably be sometime in March, shortly after the first year player draft in the ABL. But looking forward to seeing you all again on the next episode. And keep looking at these J15s. Hopefully you found this to be helpful or interesting at least. In any event, until I see you the next time, remember to ABP. Always be prospecting.